So I'm on a new page now. We're looking at example number 4 here. And what I've written out is the frequency distribution that we came up with on the other page. So I have the different observations that we saw in our sample, the frequency with which each of those observations appeared, and here the relative frequency or percent with which each of the observations appeared. So again, you read this as saying, in our sample, 4 people had 0 felony arrests, or 33% of our sample had 0 prior felony arrests. And I've also created columns here labeled cumulative frequency and cumulative percent, which will tell us the number of cases that we have that are equal to or less than each of these different values. So we'll start with 0. How many people in our sample had 0 or fewer arrests? Well, you can't have fewer than 0 arrests, so we'll say that 4 people in our sample had 0 or fewer arrests. Well, now let's think about how many people in our sample had 1 or fewer arrests. 1 or fewer arrests means 1 arrest or 0 arrests. So we can look at the frequencies for those. And here we could say we have 3 people with 1 arrest and 4 people with 0 arrests. So in order to get that, we're going to add up those two and we'll put a 7 there. So we get a 7 in this column, again, because we have 3 people with 1 arrest and 4 people with 0 arrests. So we have 7 people who have 1 arrests or less in this sample. And another way that you can do this, which we're going to start doing for the next ones, is to do something that I like to call diagonal addition. So you have a 4 in your cumulative frequency column here for 0, and a 3 in your frequency column for 1. In order to get 7, you can also add these two together. And this is always going to work because the number in your frequency column is going to be equal to the number at or less or below the observation you're interested in. So let me just go through that with another example. Now we want to know what number of people in our sample have 2 arrests or fewer. 2 or fewer means 0, 1, or 2 arrests. So we could count up the numbers in this column. We could say that's 4 plus 3 plus 2, which comes out to 9. Or we could do something a little bit easier, which is do this diagonal addition. We've got a 7 in our cumulative frequency column. We're going to add that to 2 here, and that's going to give us 9. So to keep going here, we now want to know what number of people in our sample have 3 arrests or fewer. In other words, what number have 3, 2, 1, or 0 arrests? And here I'm going to skip right to the diagonal addition part, and then I'll just show you that it'll come out the way we want it to. So we're going to take our cumulative frequency here in the column. We're going to make this diagonal line to our frequency for 3 felony arrests, and we're going to add those together. So 9 plus 1 is 10, which gives us a 10 in our cumulative frequency column. If you want to double check, you can add up all the numbers that we have for 3, 2, 1, and 0. So 4 plus 3 is 7, plus 2 is 9, plus 1 is 10. All right, so we have one more spot to fill in for cumulative frequency here, and now we want to know what number of people in the sample had 4 felony arrests or fewer. Now you might notice that the only numbers we have are 4, 3, 2, 1, and 0, which means that every single person in the sample had 4 felony arrests or fewer. This means that when we do our diagonal addition, the number that we have on the end here is going to be equal to our total number of observations. In other words, 12 people, or 10 plus 2, have 4 felony arrests or fewer. So now we're done with filling out this column. And one way to double check your work here is that your last number in the column should always be equal to n, and your first number in the column should always be equal to your first frequency. So we've got a 4 here and a 4 here in the cumulative frequency column and frequency column in the first row, and then our last number in the cumulative frequency column is equal to our total, which is n. All right, so not too bad, right? We can also do that for cumulative frequency. And with cumulative frequency, we'll be looking at the percentage of observations in our sample that are at or below a particular value. So we know from this column that 33% of people in our sample had 0 felony arrests. And for the first number in our cumulative frequency column, we're looking at the number of people with 0 arrests or fewer. You can't go lower than your lowest value, so again, that's going to be the same. So double check your work already. The first number in your cumulative frequency column should always be exactly the same as your first number in your frequency column, which we have. And you don't have to circle it in your work, I'm just doing that to illustrate that we're going to have the same pattern here. How about our next value? Well, now we want to know what percentage of people in the sample have 1 or fewer felony arrests. So we want to know the percentage of people who have 1 or 0 arrests. And here we can do the same kind of diagonal addition to get there. So we can add 33 to 25 to get our cumulative percentage for 1 felony arrest. And if you do that, you get 58. In other words, we can look at this at a glance and say 58% of the people in our sample had 1 or fewer felony arrests. And we can keep doing this down the line. It'll be the same pattern as before. To find our next cumulative frequency, aka the cumulative frequency for 2 felony arrests, we will add 58 to the number in the frequency column for 2, which is 17. And that gives us 75. So 75% of people in our sample had 2 or fewer arrests. And we'll just keep going on down the line. So if you add 75 and 8, you get 83. This means that 83% of the sample had 3 or fewer felony arrests. And finally, we'll get to our last number here. And if we add this up, we get 100. So this should make sense, right? 100% of the people in the sample, in other words, everybody, had 4 or fewer felony arrests, which is what you see when you look back at our original data here. 100% of the sample has 4 or fewer arrests. And just to double check, our final number in our cumulative frequency column is going to be equal to our total, which is 100%.